I'm so excited that she was able to do the show. She is a Palestinian human rights lawyer. She's an author. Noura Erakat, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Katie.
We've never met, so I want to thank you for all you do. Also offer you my condolences, because I'm used to seeing you on Democracy Now! To talk about politics, but I remember seeing you talk about your cousin who had been killed.
I appreciate that really so much. Thank you for all your tireless labor and for lifting this up on this platform. And that was probably the most difficult interview I've ever done, because there's a way in which, as a Palestinian trying to speak on behalf of an entire people, that you want to maintain your composure. You want to speak to an audience and convince them of some basic facts so that they can decide for themselves. And yet in that moment, I couldn't be the analyst. I was the bereaved family member of a young 27-year-old man shot dead at a checkpoint separating two Palestinian cities on the day of his sister's wedding, who was accused immediately of being a terrorist, where there was no autopsy. His body is still held in captivity, along with the bodies of 62 other Palestinians. We've since collaborated with forensic architecture. It has been demonstrated that the car was decelerating and that it must have been a mechanical error. There has been no budging on this issue. And instead, we're out here, constantly having to respond to horrible accusations, because the presumption is that he was already always guilty. You all were discussing this idea that we never talk about Palestinian men being killed, right? Because the presumption is that every Palestinian man is a militant, is a fighter. Every child is a potential fighter who will then become, the militant. So there's this way that Palestinian men can't be victims in our society, and that Palestinian women can only be saved in our society. Even the rhetoric around, folks wanting us to be perfect victims. They want us to lay down and die. They want us to lay down and die and not fight back. And that, in one's head, it's this, this idea that we can be saved, but we can't save ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we're not here to be saved. We're here looking for solidarity. So that is the history of all people's movements. Palestinians are not unique in their freedom struggle. They're not the first, they're not the last. It happens to be in a particular historical moment where it remains one of the last outstanding agenda items on an anti-colonial agenda. And so it's anachronistic. It's in between time and space. And so that's what makes it so unique. I'm going to stop so I can let you ask me whatever questions.
No, thank you. Yeah. It's funny because it's so accepted for most media to have, and politicians in the United States to have emotional connections to Israel, in a way that it's not for people to have emotional connections to Palestine.
Yumna mentioned the family of 15. Talk about emotional. That is my dear friend Hussam al-Qoalaq's family. Hussam is a lawyer based in Los Angeles. He's a brilliant young man, incredibly funny. He likes to surf for fun, right? He wants to live his life, but today he listed his 15 family members, and I just want to read out their first names at least in his honor and for his sake. I haven't heard from him today, and Hussam, نحن معك والله يرحمهم ويسلم راسك. May we continue this fight and until victory in their memory. Amin Muhammad, Ayat Ibrahim, Muhammad Auni, Taher Shukri, Ahmad Shukri, Fawaz Shukri, Riham Fawaz, Sameh Fawaz, al-Hamid Fawaz, Qusai Sameh, Izat Mu'in, Zayd Izzat, Adam Izzat, Saadiya Yusef, Amal Jamil. Those are 15 spirits and dreams. Those are 15 relationships in the world. And it's for some reason, I know the reason, right? Because racism and colonialism, but people don't see these names. They just expect us to die. They expect us to die in ways that they don't expect Jewish Israelis to die. When Jewish Israelis die, there's shock, there's fear, They're like us. But it's okay when we die because we're supposed to. Colonial violence, this is the outcome of colonial violence, and it's the acceptance of this colonial structure, right? That's why there's so much anxiety about Hamas rockets, right? Nobody's angry about the violence of siege,
right,
or the violence of bombardment, or the violence of checkpoints, or the violence of apartheid, or the violence of pogroms against Arab, Palestinian citizens of Israel, right? But they get really anxious about the violence of the natives.
right.
And this goes back to Fanon. This is like what liberals do. They're not upset. They don't become adherents of nonviolence except when the natives become violent, right? So I just, I want to point that out, that if that is what your main issue is that you just don't like violence and you just want everyone to get along, I'm going to respect you, but I won't believe you until I see you condemning Israel's violence, calling for its demilitarization and end to its nuclear program, and sanctions on Israel. Then you make sense to me. Otherwise, you just sound like you want us to die quietly.